Chapter 31. Kelly stood by one of the combat skiffs. After connecting her block to its onboard computer, she ran a last-minute diagnostic. Fuel, go. Ammo, go. Thrusters, go. She scanned the report as each system was tested for integrity and functionality. A white plume of nitrogen, barely more than a ghost of vapor, rushed out of the port thruster and then the starboard. The aft and bow followed close after. The test fires used almost no fuel, and they were more than likely an unnecessary check, but the tiny clouds of vapor helped settle her nerves. This was it. No more training, no more simulations. She was taking her squad to Mira in a real combat skiff with real weapons and a real mission. Instead of trying to save some hapless miner floating in Saturn's rings, they had to stabilize Mira's spin, requiring thruster placement, grab walks, and careful piloting. This was real. 10 meters away, Gunny was running through the same steps she was. That made her feel a little more confident. When she first started the diagnostic, she thought both the Marines and Gunny would see her diligence as an attempt to mask fear. The thunk of grab boots on the deck broke her attention from the reports. She looked up and nearly smiled. Dickerson, Carbonaro, and Elliot carried long steel boxes of weapons and supplies. They dropped their loads next to the skiff and stood back. Dickerson wiped a sheen of sweat from his brow. "Corporal, we have the goodies." "Excellent," Kelly said. She stared at each of the transparent aluminum assault lockers. One contained 4 flechette carbines and extra ammunition, while the others housed nanoprobes, trauma kits, O2 packs, Atmos steel cutters and sealers, suit patches, and demolition charges. The only equipment she thought they could possibly use on this part of the mission were the nanoprobes. Maybe, but she wasn't going out there unprepared. "Let's load 'em up," she said. Wint was still in the hands of the auto doc. The swarms of bio-nannies in his body were doing their best to repair the damage from the concussion, but it was a slow process. Another day, 2 at the most, and he'd be cleared for duty. And then I'll kick his ass, she thought. But until then, her squad was 1 human down. Dickerson and Carbonaro pushed each of the lockers over the skiff's side. Callie and Elliot took each and loaded them into the small cargo area. The magnetic fields came to life and locked each of the boxes in place. Since the skiff was exposed to both vacuum and ZG, every piece of equipment the Marines carried had to be secured via magnetics or tethers. Tethers were a last resort, especially on ingress or egress, as they were much less stable and prone to failure. She hoped they wouldn't have a reason to use them. With the gear loaded, she stared at the 3 Marines. "Once we cut to ZG, we'll tow out the thruster packs. Dickerson, you've got the duty. You'll sit in the back and mind the cargo." "Aye, Corporal," he said. "Carbonaro, I want you in the gunner seat. Elliot, handle navigation. I'll pilot the skiff to the rendezvous coordinates." She met the eyes of each Marine in turn. "Any questions?" "No, Corporal," the 3 said in unison. "Outstanding," Kelly said. She looked over at Gunny. His squad was still placing their gear. "This isn't a hot zone," she said, "so I don't expect we'll need our weapons, but we need to treat this as what it is, an unknown situation with shit intel. Stay on your toes. I will not have another Marine in my charge nearly kill themselves because they aren't paying attention. Understood?" "Aye, Corporal." She smiled. "That's what I wanted to hear." She turned back to check on Gunny. He was growling at his Marines. They had finally finished their loadout. According to the obscenities pouring from Gunny's mouth, they hadn't done a particularly good job. Dickerson giggled as he stepped away from the skiff and inspected the thruster packs. "Something funny, Dickerson?" Kelly asked. He lifted his head and smiled at her. "Just glad I'm not in Gunny's squad, Corporal." He traveled the length of the tow sheet, checking each of the thrusters in turn. The hydrazine thruster pack sat on a 3-meter square of Atmos steel behind the skiffs. 10 octagonal thrusters, each half a meter tall, sat in blisters on the tow skid. Once the magnetics were activated, the skid would attach to the skiff, essentially becoming another part of the vehicle. 4 spare tow sheets sat at the back of the cargo bay. If too many of the thrusters failed, or if Mira's tumble couldn't be corrected by the first load of thrusters, the Marines would have to return to S&R Black for another load. She hoped Black and Oakes' calculations were correct. She didn't like the idea of changing Mira's trajectory only to have to repeat the process again. Each journey from S&R Black to Mira increased the chances of something going wrong and Marines being hurt or killed. "Officer on deck!" Gunny yelled. She moved to stand at attention, but before she could, Talby bellowed, "As you were!" Kelly turned and found the lieutenant walking into the cargo bay. He was dressed in a combat flight uniform, helmet held in his hands. He stared at one skiff and then the other. A slight smile touched his lips. "Gunny, your squad ready?" "Aye, sir." "Corporal?" "Aye, sir," she said in a loud, confident voice. Her skin prickled with nervous tension, or was it fear? Either way, she wasn't going to show it to the rest of the squad, and certainly not to the LT. Talby nodded. "We're a go in 5 minutes. I'll take the 52 on a recon flight while the skiffs make their approach. Pilots, be ready for any adjustments." "Aye, sir." "Aye, sir," Gunny and Kelly said. "Get to it," Talby said. "Good hunting." "Hoo-ha! Black!" Talby walked past the skiffs into the SV-52. She watched as he climbed into the blocky craft's cockpit and shut the canopy over himself. There was room inside for a gunner, but considering the mission, it was unnecessary. Even if it came to using the weapons, she little doubt Talby could handle himself without an extra Marine. "Dickerson, you ready?" "Ah, Corporal." He put his helmet on, but didn't shut the visor. Carbonaro climbed into the skiff and took her station at the mounted cannon. Elliot slid into the navigation seat and brought up the screens. Once Khalid performed a final check to ensure everything was locked down and ready to go, she took her place in the pilot's chair. "T-minus 1 minute, Talby's voice said through the comms. Khalid connected to the squad channel. "All right, Marines, pressurize and magnetize." Her 3 Marines acknowledged, and she shut her own visor. The suit automatically drew atmosphere from the small pack on her back. Once her HUD went green, she connected the suit's O2 cable to the skiff. The others, except for Dickerson, did the same. While in the skiff, they could use its O2 supply without wasting their own. The skiff's magnetic field would keep it firmly attached to the deck when the cargo bay depressurized. "Dickerson," she said, "make damn sure you activate your mag boots. Don't want you floating away when the bay doors open." "Aye, Corporal," he said, insubordination obvious in his tone. "In 10, Talby said over the comms. She kept her eyes forward, staring at the large sliding airlock doors. A yellow light began flashing and then turned red. Her HUD lit up with a warning, and then Black's voice followed. "Venting residual atmosphere. Good hunting, Marines." The light turned dark red. She took a long, deep breath and held it as the giant doors slid past one another. There was no sound, but she felt the remaining air rush past her suit and into space. The skiff remained affixed to the deck. Less than 50 meters from Mira, she was all they could see. The giant starship spun end over end at a deceptively slow rate. "Cutting cargo grav plates for vehicles and skids," Talby said. "In 10. The lieutenant slowly counted down. Her HUD glowed yellow as the grav plates ceased holding them down. The skiff stayed still without momentum to move it into space. "Dickerson, we ready?" The skiff shuddered as the rear magnet attached the thruster skid to the skiff. "Attached, Corporal." "Good. Get in." "Aye," Dickerson said. She didn't turn the pilot's chair, but she felt the skiff shudder again. "In the rear with the gear," he said. "Squad, all set?" Her Marines rattled off affirmatives. "Lieutenant, permission to leave the cargo bay." "Granted," Talby's voice said. "Slow and easy, Marines. Let's get this done without a hitch." Mira continued to roll before her. She focused on its center, the part of the ship moving the least, and hit the jets. The skiff rose nearly a meter off the deck. The rear camera view showed the thruster skid doing the same. Good. Everything was how it should be. She nudged the throttle forward, and a jet of gas erupted from the skiff's rear. At just a meter per second velocity, the skiff moved from the cargo bay and into space. S&R Black's powerful lights illuminated much of Mira's axis, but there were still shadows just beyond the rendezvous point. Kali kept her eyes focused on the target, nudging the throttle gently, first to starboard and then to port, to keep them on track. She increased the speed to 3 meters per second. Her HUD lit up with a side view. Gunny sat in his command chair, piloting his skiff to stay 10 meters abreast. The two skiffs moved through space in tandem. Both the squad comms and the open comms were deathly silent. In the vacuum of space, she only heard the sound of her own breathing. They closed on Mira. 20 meters, Kelly called out. She heard Gunny call out the same distance. They were close enough to Mira that it was impossible to see below or above her. The derelict's pitted gray hull continued its spin. She nudged the 4 thrusters, and the skiff slowed to 1 meter per second. Gunny, approaching rendezvous.
Right beside you, Corporal.
Now was the tricky part. Flying a skiff across space was easy. Orienting the skiff so it would land on a moving target wasn't. Prepare for attitude match, she said through the comms. By moving her left hand, she fired the rotation thrusters, and the skiff began to cant. How's our cargo, Dickerson?
We're good, Corporal.
They were a mere 5 meters away from Mira now. She reoriented the skiff so its bottom was just above the derelict's hull. Through her HUD, she saw Gunny doing the same. The two skiffs were less than 5 meters apart now, each rotating and rolling. Without gravity, and with the two skiffs in perfect orientation with Mira, Kali could no longer even tell Mira was moving. The ship might as well have been a perfectly stationary object. Kali looked up from her command chair. S&R Black appeared to be rotating just as Mira had. The ship slowly disappeared from her field of view as the skiff rolled. The view was disorienting, and she quickly flicked her eyes back to the holo display. In position, Gunny, she said.
Go for landing,
he said. She activated another set of thrusters, and jets of gas puffed upward from the skiff's sides. The skiff moved downward until it hovered half a meter above Mira's hull. Activating magnetics. The rays shuddered slightly as the skiff's magnetic field powered up, holding their position just above the hull plates. She blew a sigh through her teeth. She'd done it. They were now on Mira. Attached, she said over the open comms.
Same here. Lieutenant?
Gunny said.
Both skiffs attached. Do we have a go for thruster placement? Aye, Gunny. Good work, Marines. Now let's get her stabilized. Aye, sir,
Gunny said.
Kalimura, you know the drill. Any last-minute questions?
No, Gunny.
Good. You heard the LT. Let's do this.
Aye. She opened the squad channel. Dickerson, Carbonaro, take the first thrusters out. I want a clean grab walk. Elliot, get yourself on the hull. Take the line gun and spot for debris.
Aye, Corporal,
Elliot said. Kelly turned in place so she could watch Dickerson and Carbonaro. Dickerson was already out of the skiff and walking across the thruster skid. His magnetized boots alternately attached and detached as he walked, making it appear as though he were knee-deep in water. Carbonaro pulled herself along the length of the skiff using her magnetic gloves and joined Dickerson on the skid. Elliot had already disengaged and was attached to the hull a meter away from the skiff. Elliot's job was not only to look for close-flying debris, but to act as a failsafe in case either Dickerson or Carbonaro had an issue. He held the line gun in his hands, ready to fire the tether to either Marine if they needed it. The first set of thrusters would be used to stop Mira's axial spin. According to Oakes and Black, they'd need 4 thrusters in total, 2 placed by her squad and another 2 by Gunny's. That would leave them 16 total thrusters for the rest of the mission. Carbonaro and Dickerson each removed a thruster pack from the skid's aft. Carbonaro attached one of her gloves to the thruster. Dickerson did the same with his own. He activated his suit thrusters and the pack rose from its skid slot in a smooth, almost liquid motion. Carbonaro did the same with hers. Sending coordinates, Kalimura said to them, and activated her block. On each of the Marines' HUDs, targets lit up in crimson. Dickerson had the spot 40 meters down the hull. Carbonaro would place hers 20 meters down. Gunny's squad had the opposite side. She watched as Dickerson expertly grab-walked down the hole. He passed Carbonaro and continued on his way, his legs constantly pumping.
Show off,
Carbonaro said. Callie tried not to laugh. Carbonaro reached her spot and placed the thruster. The half-meter-tall device clamped onto the hull. She pressed the base down on the pack and puffs of gas rose into space as the built-in bolts shot into the outmost steel. Dickerson proceeded to do the same with his. When he finished, he looked past the thruster to several meters further down the hull. She watched as he walked away from the thruster.
Wow,
He said.
There's some strange shit on the hull.
What are you talking about? Kelly asked. Her HUD flashed and an image appeared in the lower left. She increased its size and studied it. Dickerson had sent her a picture of several quarter-meter indentations on the outmost steel. It took a moment for her to realize she wasn't looking at indentations. Dickerson's suit lights illuminated several bristled, conical objects embedded in the steel. Dickerson, whatever those are, stay the hell away from them. We can take a sample of them after we get the ship stabilized.
Ah,
Dickerson said. He lingered for a moment, his helmet cam snapping still images. If her boots hadn't been magnetized to the skiff, she would have tapped her foot. When he was done, he raised a thumb.
All good, Corporal.
He started grab-walking back to the skiff. Carbonaro?
Clear, boss.
Kalimura opened her mouth to admonish her for the address, but chose not to. She had a feeling that was Carbonaro's way of showing respect. It was a start, after all. Good job. Let's get back to...
Corporal,
Elliot said.
we have a...
Black's voice broke through the comms.
Marines, ice shards are headed toward your position. Please use caution while grab walking.
Her HUD flashed red twice, and the warning compass showed her the direction of the hazard. Kelly turned and scanned the area. Mira was still rolling, as well as tumbling, but she caught sight of the ice floating in front of S&R Black's lights. The shards glinted in the illumination, looking like silver icicles. Her heartbeat rose slightly. The Shatterstorm was closer to S&R Black than Mira, but they still had to be watchful. Any of those shards might puncture a suit. Worse, they could knock an unsecured Marine into space. Carbonaro, Dickerson, get back here, now!
Aye,
The two responded. Kelly glanced at Elliot. His helmet pointed in the direction of the ice missiles traveling between the two ships. Elliot, you spotted it?
yes, Corporal.
Good job,
Thank you.
he said. Now get your ass in the skiff. Elliot saluted, disengaged his boots, and pushed himself at the skiff. He flew through space for an instant before catching the lip with his magnetic gloves. He expertly climbed back into the vehicle and returned to his chair. She shook her head. Another show-off in her squad. Carbonaro and Dickerson returned to the skiff. She took the gun mount while Dickerson retreated aft. Once sure her team was secure, she opened the comms channel. Gunny, thrusters placed. Team recovered,
Acknowledged.
Gunny said.
We're going to wait until the storm passes before we fire them.
Aye, Gunny, she said. She spun in her chair and watched Gunny's crew. Two of his Marines were headed back to their skiff. Gunny stood from the command chair, his head moving slightly. She'd no doubt he was yelling at the nom-rates over his squad's channel. Kelly grinned beneath her helmet. When he and Talby had put the most experienced Marines in her squad, Gunny had signed himself up to deal with the newbies. It was unfair to him, and, to be honest, them. She imagined being one of those Marines, trying to accomplish their task all the while listening to his shouting through the comms. Better you than me, she thought. Gunny's Marines finally returned to the skiff. The two squads watched as the ice particles continued to streak between Mira and S&R Black. It was beautiful. Some of the ice shards were a deep blue rather than white. She wondered where the ice had come from and how far it had traveled. The gravity of the Kuiper Belt objects might not be enough to trap them. Hell, they might travel all the way to Pluto before finding a home in its orbit. If not, they might even make it to Neptune. It took nearly 5 minutes for the storm to pass. The tail end looked more like rock than ice. Whatever KBO or exosolar object gave birth to the debris, it had likely been pulverized. She hoped whatever had hit it was nowhere near them.
The storm has passed,
Black said.
You may resume your mission, Marines. Acknowledged,
Gunny said.
All right, Marines, you heard the lady. Get moving.
Aye, Gunny, Kelly said. Crew, prepare for launch. She checked once more to ensure her squad was situated and demagnetized the skiff. She nudged the ray off the hull with a blast from the thrusters, and the vehicle rose. The skiff flew backward and away from Mira. Gunny's skiff followed hers until they were between S&R Black and the giant derelict.
Marines,
Black said over the comms.
We are ready to fire thrusters. Acknowledged,
Gunny said.
Light it up.